Baruch here with genConnect, joined today by Dr. Ezekiel Emmanuel. Dr. Emmanuel, I know that you are one of the foremost bioethicists here in the United States. There's a real question about who gets the liver. There are a limited number of livers and organs and so many people who need them. How do you solve that?
So we have about 5,600 transplants a year and about 15,000 people on the waiting list. And there's a set of criteria called the MELD criteria, which mostly allocate organs to the sickest people first. But a lot of people who, if you just engage the general public, they have other criteria than the sickest first. Many people think prognosis, who's going to live the longest number of years, is important. Some people think younger people ought to have priority over older people because they haven't had a chance to live a life. Other people think, you know, if you can save 2 people with an organ, or instead of giving, say, a liver and kidney to one person, you give a liver to one person, a kidney to another, that's also important. And some people think what you contribute to society ought to count. So a lot of criteria. My own view is no single criteria, sickest first or best number of life years ought to govern it, that we need to combine 4 or 5 criteria. And I personally don't like the sickest first. I think that's not actually a really good standard, even though that's the one that's being used. The
idea of what somebody would bring to society, that in essence is looking at this as a return on investment. What are we going to get out of keeping this guy alive or woman alive?
So when I've written about this, I actually don't think for livers we ought to take that into account. But I do think that when we're in an emergency situation and we have to allocate something, say there were to be a flu pandemic and we had a limited number of vaccines, who gets it? Almost everyone believes that the first lot of flu vaccines ought to go to first responders, doctors, nurses taking care of sick people, people keeping the electricity grid and food supply available. And that's a pretty general view. So that is sort of who pays back society, but in a very limited constraint, because you save the doctor, you save the nurse, you save the guy keeping the electricity on, because they're going to help save many more people, not because somehow doctors are more valuable than the average citizen.
Can money ever play a role here in terms of bidding for organs?
That's a very good question. So I would say 2 things. When you have an absolute scarcity, there's not enough and someone's going to die, you really don't want money bidding. And you don't want the rich to be able to buy out. And I think a lot of people found the whole thing around Steve Jobs getting it a little distasteful, because they suspected that while he might not have directly bought the organ, he certainly didn't. There was a way in which he was on multiple lists at the same time, which is legal, but people think only the rich can do that, and so it's really not fair. Now, the question of whether if we allowed the system to purchase organs, we would get rid of the shortage, is an unanswered question. We haven't really run that experiment. Now, certain hardcore economists will say, oh yeah, just let the market, you'll get more organs. But there are data and there are experiences where actually, if you let the market play, people who would donate say, well, you know, I'm not going to donate. And so you actually net decrease the number of organs. So I think, in my view, it's purely a question of what are the consequences. If we could pay and get lots more organs, then it's probably worth it. If we pay and the net is the same or less organs, it's not worth it.
Switching gears, I need to ask you, you and your brothers Ram and Ari have all reached the pinnacles of your respective sectors. What were your parents...
Well, that's hyperbole, if I ever heard it.
I think it's absolutely true, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. What were your parents feeding you?
We basically had cereal every morning, and we had oatmeal, and I hated it. I can't eat oatmeal now because of that. But I think, more seriously, my parents were extremely socially committed. My mother was heavily involved in the civil rights movement in the early 60s, before it was fashionable, in the anti-war movement early. My dad was very much involved in the getting rid of lead paint and trying to make city housing more healthy for children. And they, you know, we went to the demonstrations, we heard the conversation, and they impressed upon us that you had to give back something. You couldn't just be consumer, you had to be a contributor, and I think that's an ethos that has made us strive very hard for things. And, you know, the other thing that they made clear is life is full of disappointments and defeats, and it's not It's not going to be delivered to you on a silver platter, and that you're going to get knocked down a lot of times. But the measure of a person is being able to get up and just keep going and try again and keep trying.
So you are very inspiring, Dr. Emmanuel. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for more with Dr. Emmanuel, be sure to check out genConnect.